Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Star Trek Next Generation Season 4. This video is a part of a series of videos where I cover every episode of Star Trek Next Generation, one season at a time, and in this video I will cover all the episodes of Season 4. Now, Season 4 it's a good season. I would say it's one of the better ones of Next Generation, but I've heard other people say it's like one of the best, like the best or the second best, which I'm not quite sure. For some reason, whenever I think of Season 4, I think of mediocre episodes like Night Terrors, Identity Crisis, Devil's Due, the Nth Degree, Cupid. For some reason, these episodes come straight to my mind when I think of Season 4, so I'm always go like, that's just an okay, mediocre season. But there are actually some really great episodes this season. I don't know why. I guess it did have a run of those sort of mediocre kind of bleh episodes like in the middle of the season, which, to be fair, a lot of seasons do. Well, I don't know why those ones sort of cling to my mind whenever I think of Season 4. And so it's actually a better season than I tend to give it credit for on a gut reaction. Because they're like, if you saw my coverage of Season 3, I said how that was the singular best season of all Star Trek, the entire Star Trek franchise. And I don't think Season 4 quite lived up to that, but it was still a great season. Like, it didn't, plummet. Like, it still maintained a bit of that quality. It just didn't quite hit the mark for me, because Season 3, if you saw my coverage, how I give every episode a rating between 1 and 10, 1 being the worst, 10 being the best, none of the episodes and Season 3 got a bad rating, which would be 1 through 5. The lowest two episodes got a 6, but most of the episodes, other than those two, were above a 7 or better, and a 7's pretty decent rating. It's not the case for Season 4. There are actually quite a few episodes this season to get a bad rating. In fact, there's one episode that gets a 1, and quite a couple that get a 3 and 4s. So it doesn't have that, consistency that Season 3 had. But to be fair, there are probably just as many episodes this season that get 9 or 10s that I think are great episodes than there were in Season 3. In fact, there might be more this season, but it's a bit less consistent. And as I said, it had a run of really average episodes in the middle of the season. So I don't think that highly of it. Now, from memory, and again, this might change on my rewatch, from memory, Seasons 3 and 6 were my favorite, although I think 3 is clearly better than 6. My third favorite, I think, is a toss-up. It's either going to be this season, Season 4, or Season 7, which I know a lot of people will be like, ooh, what do you mean Season 7? Because a lot of people love to hate on Season 7, but I actually really love Season 7. But I'll have to wait for my rewatch of Season 7 before I determine whether or not I think it's better than Season 4. Just from memory, especially after just watching Season 4, I would say they're pretty much on par, in my opinion, bearing in mind that I really like Season 7, apparently a lot more than most people do. But yeah, it's interesting. Another thing to get into that's interesting to get into regarding Season 4 is that the way I watched this show. Now, I talked about this in previous videos, that I started watching Star Trek overall when I was 12, 13, 11. I think I was 12 years old. It was while Season 5 was airing. And so, even though Season 5 was the first season I saw as it aired, I only saw that week to week. I was basically going back in the 90s equivalent of binge watching. Of course, we didn't really have Netflix or anything like that. So the only way to watch a show would be on reruns. on shows. You had to tune into the reruns and watch it in syndication. I mean, they had it on VHS, but there was like $15 for one episode, and I'm like, that's ridiculous. I'm not gonna pay that. So basically, I had to tune in and watch in whatever order the show happened to be showing it in. And while season 5 was airing, season 4 had just come out onto syndication. And so all the syndication shows I was watching were showing season 4 over and over and over again. And I talked about this before with season 3. It would actually be like much later, I think almost a year later, or at least it felt that to me, before I actually got to watch season 3. So season 3 was always kind of this white whale thing to me. In the meantime, they kept showing season 4 on repeat. So it's probably the season I've seen the most, of the episodes I've seen the most, which may have dulled my reaction to it a little bit. But I don't know. I don't think that's actually the case. I think it's a good season, but I think there's definitely flaws. I don't think it's anywhere near as strong as season 3. So anyway, let me go ahead and get into the episodes of season 4, starting with everyone's favorite Best of Both Worlds Part 2. Now, one thing I will say positive about this, because again, if you're new to my reviews, I'm not as big on Best of Both Worlds as everyone else is. Everyone else will say this is the number 1 best episode of Next Generation, or maybe number 2 or my number 3, but definitely in that top 3. I wouldn't even put this in my top 20, if I'm being honest. It probably will make my top 50, but not my top 20. I like these episodes. I think they're good. I just don't think they're the best thing ever. And I got a bit more into this in part 1. But I will say I did do a full-length review of these episodes a few years ago, like 3 or 4 years ago. And on this recent rewatch that I'm doing now, my opinion of these episodes actually gone up a little bit. Like before, I gave it an 8 out of 10. And after I watched part 1, I noted that I gave that a 9 out of 10, but I thought maybe the second part would bring it down to an 8. But after watching the second part, I'm keeping it at a 9. I think a 9 out of 10 is actually, so I'm actually elevating it to what I did with my review. I think I was a bit harsher on the episode just because everyone else says it's the best thing since sliced bread, which I don't quite agree, but giving it a fair shake, I do see that there are a lot of great qualities in Best of Both Worlds. Now, part 2, I still would say is the weaker of the 2 episodes. I think Next Generation in general has, and Star Trek in general, I should say, has a problem with when they do these 2-part cliffhangers, that the second part never lives up to the first part. I think Scorpion might be the only exception to that, but I think it's actually true in this case. In fact, one person who completely agrees with me is the person who wrote these episodes, Michael Piller. He said in interviews that he feels like he kind of dropped the ball with part 2 and it didn't quite live up to what the standard they set in part 1. And you know what? I kind of agree with him. And again, it's not to say it's a bad episode. I still think it's a great episode. And actually, as I said, watching it again, I realized that there is a lot to this episode that makes it really good. For example, the issues I had with part 1 is the whole Shelby and Riker storyline, which I didn't like, with them going me. They downplayed that. It wasn't as bad. They were more working together. Although, I will say Shelby kind of came off as a bit of a superfluous character. Like, in this episode, that you didn't even need her. In fact, I always said that I wish she wasn't there, therefore Data would become Riker's first officer, because I always wanted to see Data as the first officer, so it kind of annoyed me he didn't get that shot. But then again, he was busy doing the whole Picard thing in his lab at the end of the episode anyway, so it wouldn't have been much point to it. But yeah, I mean, starting with the opening scene of this, I when I did my full-length review, I said that it was a bit anticlimactic, and I 1000% stand by that. I think, even though, like, it does set up the rest of the episode that, Picard has all this information now, and the Borg know everything Picard knows, so it makes the Borg even more scary. That is true. That is very true. But the specific cliffhanger at the end of part 1 was, Riker's going to destroy the ship with this fancy new weapon, and then part 2 starts and the fancy new weapon just goes and does nothing. That's anticlimactic. And to be fair, and as I said in my overall review, that's unavoidable. That was, even though I still say this is the best cliffhanger of all time, and it was an amazing cliffhanger at the end of part 1, they were kind of setting themselves up for failure because there was no way to really pay that off. Unless, of course, they really had balls and just blew up the Borg ship and killed Picard. And there were rumors that Patrick Stewart wanted to leave the show, and that could happen. But then again, I don't think the rest of the show would have been as good if they did that. But that would have been a bold move, you got to admit. But then what are we going to do for the rest of the episode if they destroy the Borg ship that soon? But still, I don't know. Regardless, I think they were kind of set up to fail because I did find that a bit anticlimactic. Oh, fire! And just nothing happens. And I don't care, if it's setting up, Picard knows all the Borg knows. Yeah, I mean, that doesn't change the fact that that one moment is very anticlimactic. Anyway, and other issues I had with this episode, one of the main issues I had, and I think this is probably worse in part 2 than it was in part 1, is that the Borg could have easily destroyed the Enterprise at any moment, because this is a problem when you present a villain that's so invincible, unstoppable, and a lot of people point this out in Voyager, like, how can this one tiny ship survive with all these Borg ships everywhere? But that problem's also true here. People just just tend to ignore it more because there's, like, particularly the scene where you where they rescue Picard, where the salsa section fires this antimatter spread, and you got Riker on the battle bridge going and flying off. If the Borg were consistent with powers, they would have hit the tractor beam, go destroyed the salsa section instantly, and then went over to the freaking the star drive section and did the same goddamn thing. And then with the antimatter spreaders gone, they do the same thing to the shuttle. Boom, 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 destroyed. Borg move on with their lives and destroy Earth. So it was a bit contrived. And especially, like, after they rescued Picard and the Borg just sitting there, and Wesley's like, oh my god, the salsa section is a sitting duck, and the Borg just ignore it and fuck off to Earth. Why would they do that? That's not consistent. Consistently, they showed that anyone tries to stand in their way, they destroy them. And guess what? The Enterprise tried to stand in their way, so they should have just went like, episode over. And another thing I absolutely stand by is that the way they defeated the Borg with Data going into and putting them to sleep, like, was way, way, way too easy. In fact, I couldn't imagine, once they made the Borg a bit more complex and got more into the details on how the Borg operated in Voyager, I couldn't imagine them doing that, because that's, like, way too easy. The Borg would just be like, they're trying to put us to sleep. Well, let's just override this because they're obviously trying to destroy us. And the whole thing with, like, computer systems blowing up because they get overloaded, like, I don't know. I compared it to the whole computer virus thing in Independence Day, which is a brutal comparison, maybe a bit unfair, but I still think there's some similarity there. I'm sorry, I think it was way too easy. In fact, this is one of the things Michael Bullard talked about when he was like, he could not figure out how to defeat the Borg. He was like, this is impossible. I set myself up for too impossible of a situation. I don't know how to get out of it. And I think that's evident, and I think the resolution that they finally came up with was weak. I think they set themselves up too hard. Now, getting more into what I like about this episode, I do think the feeling of tension, which I said was the best thing about part 1, was also present, at probably even more so in part 2. And I do love, like, you gotta love the music. It was one of the best things about these episodes. Like the moments, for example, when they showed, when they have Worf or someone say, or Data, I don't remember who it was, but they're like, the Borg have entered Sector 001, and then they cut to a shot of the Borg, like, flying past this ring planet, and they play that music, dun, 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 and that was actually extremely effective. And there was a lot of episodes and movies later on where Star Trek would put Earth in danger, and honestly, I don't think any of those pulled it off as well as this episode did. One comparison that immediately comes to mind is at the end of the episode where a Borg ship is right above Earth and Enterprise is there trying to destroy it. It reminded me so much of the Enterprise episode Zero Hour, which is an episode I love, where the Xindi are trying to destroy Earth and the Enterprise is there in orbit trying to stop them. And it's obvious to me now that in that episode they were just emulating this one, that they were just copying what they did here in Best of Both Worlds. And to be fair, I think this episode for the most part does a better job. As I said, that whole going to, blowing up the ship because of regenerating was a bit ridiculous. But the stakes felt higher and they felt more well earned in this episode. And in particular, you got a lot, and this is really a Riker episode as well. Some people try to put this off as the Picard episode. This is especially part 2. It's clearly a Riker episode, particularly where you get great character beats where Guinan goes to talk to him and he has to realize, how do I beat Picard or whatever. And you get some great Riker moments as well when he says, take your best shot, Locutus, because I'm about to intervene. And he pulls off that badass plan to rescue Picard, which, as I said, actually shouldn't have worked. But if we go with it and say that it worked, that was a badass Riker scene. And we get some more great character moments with him struggling to be captain and having to face off against his mentor and basically kill him if necessary. Like, these were really well played, great, tense character moments, and particularly the ending of the episode, even though I say that sleep was ridiculous and I stand by that, was still really exciting. The way that Riker was willing to just have a collision course to try to destroy the Borg ship, but then Data at the last second tells him to stand by, and Riker's like, I can't stand by. Those were really some of the best intense moments of the entire show. So I do think the whole putting Earth in danger thing really worked. So I'm gonna give this episode a higher rating than I had before, but I still think it's not as great as everyone else says. So anyway, let me move over to the next episode, which is Family. Now, this is an episode when I first saw this when I was a teenager. I hated this episode. I thought it was boring. This is boring Picard with his father going blow, his brother goes in the mud, being assholes to each other. Who cares? Later years, I've learned to appreciate this episode a lot more, particularly in terms of continuity. Now, this is one of the episodes, I saw this episode way before I saw Best of Both Worlds. Because when I told you that season 4 was airing in syndication, they wouldn't show Best of Both Worlds or Redemption because they were considered part of season 3, or because at least part 1 was in season 3 and Redemption part 2 was in season 5, so they had to wait till season 5 came when syndication showed. So I didn't see those, but they showed Family, and it was out of context for me. But later I did get the context. I still didn't like this episode. It wasn't until years later when I was an adult that I learned to appreciate it more. But I still think it's not the greatest episode ever, as some people are holding it up to be. Some people absolutely love this episode to death. I did find, the whole situation with his brother being a dick to him a bit contrived, and I didn't really care. So I still held that opinion. I think it did seem a bit fake the way he was, you always disappointed father. I was like, I don't care about this. But I do have to say that ending where they were fighting in the mud and Picard started confessing and how terrible it was. It's you don't know what it was like and how terrible it was that the Borg used him. This was amazing character development that the show, and typically '90s episodic shows wouldn't do, and apparently, like, the writers had to really fight for this. That the producers, Rick Berman and whatnot, like, really tried to stop this from happening because they did not want, serialized storytelling, for better terms. They did not want something that an episode that you had to watch the previous episodes in order to understand. And that's actually season 4 did that a lot of this season. Actually, they got away with it, which is probably what made it good. So that was a really great scene, and I do really very much appreciate that. I also like the meeting Worf's parents. It was actually very interesting because we always all the Worf episodes are always like, oh, he's a Klingon, but they also always tend to neglect the fact that he was raised by human parents. And so I thought it was actually really great to finally meet those human parents and to see their interactions. Stuff with Wesley and his holographic message from his father scene, I mean, that was kind of touching too, but it did seem kind of just thrown in there because, hey, the theme of the episode's family, so let's just throw in this as well. So yeah, I actually really like this episode overall. I don't think it's, again, kind of similar to Best of Both Worlds. I don't think it's as good as a lot of other people tell you it is, but it's still a really powerful episode. So anyway, let me get into the next episode, which is Brothers. Now, this is an episode I always loved. My opinion that has actually come down a little bit from this because I realized, most of, the first part of the episode with Data taking over the Enterprise, it's kind of frustrating for me now because even though it was a really cool sequence, seeing Data, outsmart Picard and lock out the Enterprise and him coming up with the ridiculously long code, that was cool, but is really contrived because why would Data do... I don't know, I just don't buy that Data would do all of that. And, you say, oh, there's some program that soon initiated that forced Data to do this. I don't know, I find that far-fetched, and I find it far-fetched that, because he had to very specifically know how to lock out the Enterprise and take it over and just leave it hung there in space. I don't know, I just don't buy that he would have a program to do that and he'd be able to execute that and there was nothing Data could do to overcome it, and that once Data was there on the planet that he wouldn't think a bit more about how the hell he got there and all that other thing, and that soon would be perfectly willing to just keep the Enterprise trapped in orbit there. Makes him seem like an asshole. So that part of it bothered me, but I did like the part where Data was interacting with Soon. It was pretty interesting, although they did say that Soon was dead and they're retconning that so they could have this, but that's fine. And then, of course, it gets more interesting with lore comes in. This is one of the better uses, probably the best use of lore, because Data lore is kind of ridiculous, and then when he returns in Descent, that's also stupid and ridiculous. But because they treat him less as the evil Data and more of a bad seed brother who didn't have as good as an upbringing and it was more of a troubled childhood and has more issues and maybe mental illness comparisons and stuff like that. So I think it actually works a lot better. This is probably the only good use of lore, honestly. And I really do love that scene at the end. I think it's a very, very powerful way to end the episode, where they have those two brothers, the little kids that poison each other or whatever, and they refuse to talk to each other throughout most of the episode, but at the end of the episode they're playing and having fun, and has the other boys recovering, and Data is like, I don't understand, because they were hating each other and now all of a sudden they're happy with each other. And I think it was Dr. Crusher said that they're brothers and brothers forgive, and they have that great music play and they have that pan into Data where he's sort of analyzing that, and of course he's thinking about it in terms of his brother. And I love that. I love when these moments where they make an emotionless android really human. I think that's some of the best uses of Data. And I think that was done really well in that ending. So I still think this is a really good episode, maybe just not as great as I used to. So anyway, let me move over to the next episode, which is Suddenly Human. This episode is boring. I don't. I mean, to be fair, I didn't. This episode wasn't quite as bad as I remember it being. They have these stupid aliens called like Terralians or Torellians. There's like 6 or 7 aliens in Star Trek that have a very similar name, which I think is ridiculous. So I always get them mixed up. And they only appear in this one episode, and then they're supposed to have like this pre-existing conflict with the Federation. And that's funny because when this season first came out, or while season 5 was airing, so several years after it first came out, people were talking about how the season introduced 2 aliens who had a pre-existing conflict with the Federation, the Terralians, whatever the hell they're called, and the Cardassians. And they compared it as if it was like the same thing. But honestly, and I'll get more to this when I cover The Wounded, I never liked these Terralians and never gave much thought, where the Cardassians immediately hit me. Like, I immediately loved the Cardassians. They immediately came off as like a villain I wanted to see more. There was like a rich background. But these Terralians, like, they never see, because I never got that comparison, because even though I saw this episode before I knew Ensign existed, because I missed the first half of season 5, so as far as I was concerned, the Cardassians only appeared in that one episode, The Wounded. Even though both these aliens only appeared in one episode, I always thought of the Cardassians as a really interesting alien I want to see more of, please reoccur. Whereas Terralian is like, they're a one-off throwaway alien who I thought would never see again, and we didn't, because they're not interesting. And the episode itself, with Picard having the mentor, young boy, like, I think his Jonah's like desire to be around Captain Picard, to be mentored by him, was really contrived in the first place, so just so they could have this story with Picard having to look after a teenager. I hated that. I thought it was really stupid. I did like some of the character beats they did with him, and how, I guess overall I like the fact that first they're like, he's a human, these Terralians stole him and we should return him to his parents, but then they come to realize that no, he's been raised as a Terralian, or whatever the hell they're called, and so he really needs to go back with them because that's the only life he really knows. Like, I like that conclusion, some of the character beats around it, but a lot of the stuff around, like, Picard mentoring him, particularly when Picard comes back and the guy's listening to, like, the equivalent of heavy metal music, like, oh, turn off that damn record, blah, 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 blah. Kids, get off my lawn! Like, stuff like that I thought was really stupid. And Wesley getting hit in the face with ice cream, who cares? So, overall, this is one of the episodes. Alright, so the next episode is Remember Me, and when this episode first came out, I loved it. I think this is one of my favorite episodes of the time when I was a teenager and I first saw it, but the older I got, the less I liked it, and looking back on it now, I don't think it's a very good episode. I'm sorry. But I can see why this would appeal to teenage me, because it's very simplistic. It's a very sort of idea episode. Like, ooh, what if everyone started disappearing? Ooh, it's a mystery, and ooh, it's actually Crusher's trapped in this bubble. But looking back on that, it comes off as a bit silly, and plus I see like how flawed this episode is. First of all, Gates McFadden's acting is not very good. I don't know how else to say that. It's not very good in this episode. Not that I have anything against her or Dr. Crusher. I'm fine with them. But, it's episodes like this that remind me that she's not a very good actor, because she just doesn't do a good job. I'm sorry. And, the whole premise is, it turns out to just be a bit, it's like a Twilight Zone episode, some people say, but it's like a poorly executed one. It's just not done as well, and the whole gimmick of people are disappearing and what's going on, it just gets a bit silly, especially when you reveal it's all just a hallucination, dream, or other universe, whatever the hell you want to call it. It's kind of like, one of those. It's like, yeah, it's just, I don't know, it's not my thing. But the Traveler appears in this episode again, and I love the Traveler. And in fact, he's probably even better in this episode than he was in the first one, because he's like more confident. He's more upright. Where the first one, he was like this skinny, scrawny, like, I don't know, man, kind of guy. But here he seems like, Wesley, you need to charge your inner self. And so I actually like the Traveler better in this episode. So I like the scenes with him. And I like him helping Wesley to get his mother out of the situation. It's just contrived to me that she's having a hallucination that people are disappearing. So when the bubble appears, which is actually Wesley and LaForge trying to rescue her, she sees it as, oh, she's going to disappear too. So it's what a lovely coincidence. Anyway, don't think much of this episode. So next episode is Legacy. Now, I don't remember looking on this episode too fondly, particularly watching it now, where all the guest stars who are from this colony or whatever, are very 80s-ish. They got the whole 80s hairdo, expected to be in a hairband going, no! Yeah, they look so damn cheesy. I'm sorry, but this does not age well. But I actually appreciated this episode a lot more on the rewatch, because I think the character beats that they go with meeting Tasha sister, and how they want to like her, they want to believe her, and I mean, I've heard the complaint that the Enterprise crew was duped too easily by her, but I mean, I suppose I see an element of that, but on the other hand, I can kind of see why they wanted to trust her, and if they were keeping her a little bit at arm's length, at least, definitely at first. And even when she said she wanted to join Starfleet, they were still like, yeah, I don't know if I believe that. I think she's trying to play us. But they just didn't think she'd go as far as like to use them to try to win the war, which I can understand. And I think the relationship Ashar develops with Data was really well played, and I do genuinely believe her that she actually did like Data and did have was like kind of considering joining Starfleet, although I don't think she ever actually would. But I think for a moment she was just playing make-believe in her head of a what-if scenario. But her loyalties for her cadre, as she called it, won out, which made a lot more sense. And that sort of overwritten. And I do like even that final scene where she was going to blow up the whole thing. She's like begging and pleading with Data to leave, like she really doesn't want him to die. So I thought that actually played out really well. But the actress who played Ashar is terrible. She is so bad. Now I see what she's. In fact, when I first saw this, and even to this day, especially with that cheesy '80s hairdo, she reminds me a lot of Linda Hamilton in the first Terminator movie, or even the second one. Well, her hairdo reminds me of the first one, but her demeanor reminds me of the second one, where she has this very stoic sort of matter-of-fact, sort of battle-ridden attitude. And I see that's what the actress was going for, but she comes off as... There's a fine line between being stoic and being emotionless and dead and no acting. Bad acting. And she crosses that line into bad acting. But I do like the idea of this episode, the execution, a lot to be desired. So I actually like this episode. It's not great or anything, but I actually think it's a good episode. So now, let's get into the next episode, which is Reunion. And it's funny because I always liked this episode, but this was never a great episode to me. But the more it seems like the older I get and the more I watch this episode, the more I like it. And we come to this stage where I think this may make my top 10 best episodes of the entire show. We'll see, but I fucking love this episode. Now, this is the second episode in the so-called Klingon trilogy. That's if you consider Redemption one episode, which I do. There was a trilogy of episodes really that dealt with Worf's discommendation. It started with Sins of the Father. This is the second one, and that concludes in Redemption. And I always loved that trilogy growing up. I don't know which one I preferred. I think I liked Redemption the most. I'll get to that later. But now, I think this is clearly the best of the trilogy reunion. And I think it's the smartest, it's the most emotional, and it's the one that plays out the best in terms of character stories. Now, this brings back Kalar from season 2, and when I talked about the emissary in season 2, how much I like the character of Kalar and how much I think her the sort of relationship she had and the on-screen chemistry she had with Worf, how well that worked and how well these two actors worked together. And so I think it was a stroke of brilliance to bring her back. And I talked about the emissary, about how the fact that they brought her back and that she wasn't just a one-off romance made this character even more powerful and better, and I stand by that. But I think this episode, again, and I think a lot of this has to do with Ronald D. Moore, but because Ronald D. Moore was sort of seen as the Klingon guy, because he mainly wrote this episode, these Klingon trilogy episodes. But you can see how he's really fighting for continuity. And something that wasn't very common in Star Trek, and I think is very strong here. Not only do they bring back Kalar and they continue a story that began in Sins of the Father, but they have the balls to give Worf a son and say that Worf is a father. And also they have the balls to follow up on this in future seasons. And again, as I said, the reason that they do acknowledge this and keep this as an ongoing storyline, something that Voyager was too chicken shit to do with Chakotay, by the way, it does show that they took risks, and I think they paid off, and I love ongoing character development like this. And Kalar was amazing in this episode. This is definitely the better Kalar episode. First of all, her chemistry with Worf is just as great as ever, especially when they're talking about the sun, where Worf is where she's like, "Oh, you look like you had some questions to ask," and he's like, "Must I ask?" And she's like, "Yeah, you must." Just the dialogue between them is just so amazing. But on top of that, seeing her deal with the Klingon situation and these two challengers trying to become the Chancellor and trying to find out which one is working with the Romulans to kill Kahless, which Dur, it's Duras, that kind of paint a mustache on him that he twirls. But still, it works for this episode. I love how Duras is not a particularly smart politician, and they do portray Gowron as the smarter politician. And again, gotta give credit for them keeping Gowron as well, because he could have just as easily been a one-off character in this episode as well, but they continue it with Redemption and way on to Deep Space Nine and make him a very prominent figure in the Star Trek universe. So that again elevates this episode, that this is his first appearance. And they do try to make you guess, which make you think maybe it was Gowron who killed Kahless, because they have Kimpek. I call him Kahless. That was a chick in the first one. Kimpek, sorry. They try to make you think that it was Gowron who killed Kimpek, because they have him go up and threaten Kalar. And so when Kalar is killed, Worf thinks it's Gowron, but she's like, no, it's Kalar. And that, god damn it, Michael Dorn's acting in this episode is amazing. Particularly that scene, Kalar's death scene, was actually really hollowing, and they do callbacks to this later on, which, well, they should, where because they established that Klingon growl, that howl, that we're warning the afterlife, that a warrior is coming. But here there was so much hurt in that howl, where it was part like Klingon howl, but part just screaming in agony after losing a loved one. It was just such a hollowing scene, and then to have Worf go and freaking just go over and kill Duras for it was just, that was amazing. And then you got the dressing down scene at the end where Picard was sort of dressing him down for doing this. It's like, look, it's not cool. You can't murder someone while you're on duty as a Starfleet officer. That's just not what we do. And that was a great scene. But what I love the most is Michael Dorn's performance where he says, "Sir, I've acted within the boundaries of Klingon law," because you can see his voice is breaking up. He's still almost like he's fighting back tears. That is just such a nuanced, amazing performance. It shows just how much this whole situation, that he just lost the love of his life. Not only that, this is a very tragic love story. And I'm sorry, I love tragic love stories where because in The Emissary, K'Ehleyr didn't want to marry Worf, but now she's changed her mind. They have a son together. She wants to be a family with him, but he rejects her because of this discommendation. And that is what drives K'Ehleyr to investigate the discommendation, because she wants to get to the bottom of it, because it's preventing her from being with the man she loves. And that's what gets her killed, because Duras doesn't take kindly to her investigating this. And so, and it's really more ironic that Worf reclaims his honor or his family name or whatever at the end of the season. So if they would have just waited a year, then everything would have been fine and they could have been a family. But then again, Worf would never killed Duras, so everything might have played out a bit differently. But still, it's just a very tragic love story that works so well. So I think this is one of the best episodes of the show, honestly. Anyway, let me get into the next episode, which is Future Imperfect. And this would have been in my top 10 back in the day when I was a teenager. This is one of my favorite episodes of the entire show. But, watching it now, it's kind of, I don't know, I'm not as impressed with it. I guess because for me, back, when I first started watching it, it's like, ooh, this is the future versions of all these characters. Isn't this cool? But then again, a couple years later, All Good Things does it much better. And in that case, it's actually time travel, not just like a holodeck simulation like it is here. And then even then with holodeck situations where someone's tricking someone with the holodeck, they do that better in Ship in a Bottle in season 6. So it doesn't really stand the test of time, but it's still a good episode. I still like it. I still think you get some classic interactions, like with Riker finding out that when he keeps trying to say, "Oh, who's the mother of my son?" finally finds out that it's Minuet, who's a hologram, which is a reference I didn't get when I first saw this episode because it was before I saw season 1. And when I saw the season 1 episode, I was like, oh, okay, all right, this makes sense now. So that was all cool. And then they say, oh, it's actually a Romulan trip, but then he finds out that's a mistake as well. Although having the Ethan, he said his name was Ethan on that timeline. Having him say, "Oh, Ambassador Tom Locke," and that be the giveaway, it's like it's kind of easy fuck up there. But I guess like he's just a kid, so maybe he could fuck up that easily. And at the end of the episode, he was like, "My name is Barash." It's like, "To me, you'll always be Jean-Luc." But anyway, so that's a decent episode, not great. I'll get to the next episode, which is Final Mission. I always get this music stuck in my head. In fact, there's times where I've gone for hikes that are like, it's kind of like a desert location, or it seems like I'm walking for a long time. I'll start humming this music. Do 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 do. I'm sorry, but anyway, this episode's really boring, and I don't like it. And I think it's stupid. This is the final episode that Wesley appeared in. Well, as a main cast member anyway. He has a couple guest appearances later on, but this is when Will Wheaton leaves the show, and apparently he kind of wanted to leave the show. And I can kind of understand. Wesley, if you look back on the season, other than his little thing with the Traveler and Remember Me, he wasn't really in season 4. He was like a yes sir guy in the Best of Both Worlds, but he didn't really have much to do in this season until they finally wrote him off the show here. Which honestly, I think I talked about this in season 3 and Menage a Troi when he was supposed to go to Starfleet Academy. They should have just sent him off there. I guess they didn't know Will Wheaton would want to leave the show very soon after, but they should have just gotten rid of him there. This episode, and it was unnecessary. I mean, they might say, oh, this is Wesley's final episode, but you don't have to make a whole episode about Wesley getting stranded on the desert with Picard to have a final episode with him. You could have just, at the start, being like, all right, Wesley's fucked off to the academy, like they did with Crusher, although, in season 2, although that was kind of a bad example, so maybe it's better but this episode was really boring, I'm sorry. And it's just contrived that there would be this beautiful fountain in the middle of nowhere that's protected by a huge high-tech force field that will shoot lightning bolts that will encase you in shit if you try to get past it to get to the water. Who did this? Why did they do this? What? I mean, this is one of the worst examples of plot convenience I've ever seen in my life. Now, what saves this episode from getting a 1, because believe me, I was tempted to give this episode a 1 because was the interactions between Wesley and Picard. I do admit, like Picard saying, oh, I envy you, Wesley, like those were some good moments, but you don't need to have this contrived, stupid episode about them getting stranded, which nobody cares about, and have Durgo be this obvious asshole for no good reason in order to have those good lines. So it's still a terrible episode. It's just, it saves it from being, like, absolutely horrible. Speaking of which, let me get to the next episode, which is The Loss. So, in my opening, I said there was one episode this season that got a 1. I was referring to this episode. This episode is terrible. When I did my top 10 Next Generation video like 3 or 4 years ago, or maybe 5 years ago at this stage, I did my top 5 worst. This was on that list. And it will likely make my... Well, I don't know if it will make my top 5 worst again, but it's definitely going to make my top 10 worst. This episode is terrible. Okay, so this is the episode when Counselor Troi loses her powers. Now, I've actually seen some people say they like this episode because it makes a statement on, people with disability and how they're being treated. And I always complained about this, that this is the episode where Counselor Troi was a bitch to everyone. She treated everyone else like shit, and they let her take it. And some people would be like, no, this is a realistic portrayal of how people with disabilities feel they're being patronized by others and whatnot. Which I will fight back against hard. I don't think this is, because here's the difference. Counselor Troi doesn't lose an ability that everyone else has. She loses an ability that no one else has, that makes her superior to everyone else. Now, let me make the comparison. So I had a roommate once who was blind, and there was times where I would have to realize I was a bit privileged by having sight, because I'd say things like how I'd have to go for this long drive, and I'd go, oh my god, I have to go for this long drive, and you'd be like, you're lucky that you can drive. I can't, you take you for granted. You do have the ability to drive. You do have sight, and that humbles me, because that's true. It's absolutely true. I do have an ability that he lacks, and I take it for granted. But with the case with The Loss is almost the opposite. With the person who so quote unquote is disabled in this episode, she's the one who is privileged, and she's whining and complaining because she's no longer privileged. So this is, I think, the comparison to people who are disabled is false. It doesn't work if that's what they were going for, and clearly it was. They fail miserably, because the closer comparison, and I love how Riker calls her aristocratic. That's absolutely the case. Because the closer comparison here is someone who was highly privileged, just say someone who's rich, had billions of dollars, and was used to getting everything they always want, and all of a sudden they lose all that money and they become poor and they have to live with the poor people. And they're whining, complaining, how can you live like this? I can't stand it. And people are poor, like, bitch, I had to live like this my whole life. You're on your ivory tower, having all this privilege, are able to live like a queen, where I have to live, and now you're whining, complaining because you have to live the way I always lived. That's the closer comparison here, because she's whining, complaining that she has to live the same way that humans have always lived their whole lives. And she's like obtuse, she's rude, she's obnoxious to Dr. Crusher, treats her like garbage. Just because she lost an ability that normal humans never had. So she's acting like she's so much better than everyone else. And at the end of the episode, when she gets her powers back and she's privileged again, she has her riches again, she's like, she gives a half-assed apology that's not really an apology, and she refuses to kiss Riker you told me if you ever call me aristocratic again. And I'm like, but you are being aristocratic, bitch. And I'm sorry. And she was being completely unreasonable, and I despise her in this episode. Now, and the other thing is that when she's talking about, I can't do my job, and she wants to quit, and Picard tries to give her a speech, she's like, spare me your inspirational speech. I'm like, oh my god, I want to just good. Anyway, she's talking about quitting. Then she sucks at her job. I'm sorry, but if you can't do your job without your empathic powers, then you don't deserve the fucking job. It's like a Spider-Man movie with Iron Man, when Iron Man was going to take away his special suit. And he's like, oh, please, Mr. Stark, don't take this suit away. I'm nothing without the suit. And he says, if you're nothing without the suit, then you don't deserve that suit. And it's just, I'm sorry, it's the same thing with Counselor Troi. If you can't do your job without your powers, then you don't fucking deserve the job. If the powers is the only thing that makes you do the job. So I mean, it just shows just how I've seen like videos about how useless Troi is, and how Guinan would actually be a better counselor than she would. And in this case, that's absolutely true, because Guinan like shows her off and is like, oh, I think I would be gonna. I mean, Guinan talks about, oh, I think I might go for counselor. Guinan, I think you should. You certainly deserve it more than she does, who's too dependent on these stupid powers. But also, on top of that, you have these scenes where Counselor Troi is counseling this grieving widow, and I did think it was an interesting concept to actually see Counselor Troi behaving like a therapist, something we almost never see. But the actress who played this character is horrendous. I'm sorry, horrendous. The acting was so stilted and fake. I felt like I was watching like a cheesy 80s commercial where you're just like, you know what? I got up in the mirror and got out of bed this morning, looked in the mirror, and I decided I wanted to have some Tylenol. I'm sorry, she she came off as completely unbelievable in these scenes. This whole episode was terrible. In fact, this is how bad this episode is I talk about, and Season 4 unfortunately does this a lot. This is something Next Generation and Voyager does a lot. Voyager will do it even worse, is have to do the A-plot, B-plot structure, where the A-plot is like a character story, and the B-plot is some throwaway anomaly bullshit that nobody cares about, and they just throw it in just so they can have this thread of the week. This is actually probably the only case where they do that, and I like the B plot a lot more. I mean, that is a sign of a terrible episode, that every time they went to this B plot, which involved these two-dimensional creatures, I was like, oh, thank God. We're talking about the two. We don't have to focus on Troi being absolutely horrible and treating everyone else like shit. We can focus more on this two-dimensional creatures and Enterprise trying to get out. And so whenever they went back to, I was like, oh, okay, let's. But then they go back to Troi. Oh, no, not back to Troi. Fuck this episode. Anyway, sorry. Let me get into the next episode, which is Data's Day. I actually really like this episode. It's a high concept episode that follows events from Data's perspective, and I do like that, how we even get the plot with the Romulan. There's a Romulan spy posing as a Vulcan who you think is a Vulcan ambassador, and you think that the Romulans killed her when she offered to beam over the ship, but it's revealed she was actually a spy the whole time. I think it's an interesting concept to get a story like that, but from Data's perspective. So when the ambassador goes to have these scenes with Picard, where she's obviously talking about this peace mission, that she wants to go on, all that, you don't see that because Data's not in the meetings. And when she calls Data in to try to seek information from her, you see that from his perspective, and you get his commentary on, that was a bit weird of Vulcan doing that. It's an interesting concept I really like. And this is also the episode that introduces Keiko O'Brien, and mainly so they could have someone get married, and it was O'Brien, who's a minor character at this stage, who's getting married, and this will become a main feature, particularly when both these characters move over to Deep Space Nine. So again, I love the continuity here, and I think, again, getting that from Data's perspective is interesting, and having the scene where Crusher's trying to teach him how to dance. He's kind of obtuse. He thinks he can do tap dancing at a wedding, and he picks it up easily, but when Crusher finds out, wedding dancing is totally different, and try to show him the wedding dancing, and something that would come easy to her and to humans was actually much harder for Data to learn. I like that contrast. I think, and some of the character interactions in this episode, like Data talking to Troi about what he should do about O'Brien's and stuff like that, I think there's good insight into Data. Now, I have heard the argument that Data was being a bit more obtuse about the human behavior than he has been portrayed in previous episodes, throughout the entire show. And I definitely think that's the case. I think they definitely did upplay that a bit so they could be a bit more confusing. Like the way he goes to O'Brien is I have good news. Keiko's called off the wedding, and is surprised when he blows up. Data's not that stupid. He would at least know that. But, I'm willing to give that a pass a bit, because I do think the concept of this episode is really interesting. And plus, this is when he's writing, we get the narration because he's writing these letters to Bruce Maddox, which is, kind of helps set up Picard, because it establishes that Maddox is no longer the asshole that he was in Measure of the Man, that he's actually on good terms with Data, and Data's actually helping him further his study of androids by describing what his experience is like. And I did also really like that aspect of it. It also shows that Maddox, even though he doesn't appear in this episode, has really grown as a person as well. So that was cool as well. So, it's not the best thing ever, but it's a good, decent episode. So anyway, let me get into the next episode, which is The Wounded, and I love this episode. This is always one of my favorite episodes of Season 4. Watching it again, I do appreciate it a lot more again. I think I kind of forgot just how great of an episode it is. And again, this is the first time the Cardassians appeared, and we see Mark Alamo playing the main Cardassian, and it does make sense that when they had wanted to a huge, main, important Cardassian villain for Deep Space Nine, they brought him back, because he did do such a great job in this episode, and of course he killed it as Dukat in Deep Space Nine. And again, this was a great introduction to the Cardassians. Just by watching this one episode alone, I wanted to see Cardassians more. I wanted more Cardassians, these are such interesting villains. I had fan fiction where I write the Cardassians in. somehow, and that's even, as it says, before even though they appeared again in Ensign Row, and it was before any of their other appearances were aired. So when Deep Space Nine first came out, and they said, "Oh, we're having this other Star Trek show, and the main villain's going to be the Cardassians," I was like, "Yes!" Because they did such a great job introducing them as an alien species. There's someone I wanted to see more of, just from this one episode alone. But on top of that, you have the continuity where it follows up on Keiko and Miles getting married, and it's not just a one-off thing, and they show them having dinner together. And this is the first Chief O'Brien episode, because usually he's just the guy who stands in the transporter and makes funny jokes, but here we sort of get more into his character. Now, I did argue when I covered the Deep Space Nine episode, Terra, was it Impact Nor? I talked about how that episode was completely inconsistent with this one, although I guess it's more of a problem for that episode, as they called Chief O'Brien the hero of Cetrus 3, and Garrick is like, how many Cardassians did you kill? And in this episode, if you watch it, 1 is the answer to that, because he only killed, and it's like, it's not you, I hate Cardassian. I hate what I became because of you. Clearly the answer is 1. And so he's not like a hero, a big soldier, and he's, and Garrick is talking like it was this huge war, but here they describe it clearly as just some border skirmishes, that the Sutherland was called in very briefly because the Cardassians were attacking a colony. Now, and by the way, I love this scene with O'Brien at the bar talking to the Cardassian. That was great. Although it did kind of annoy me the way O'Brien was talking to Keiko over dinner. He's like, oh, I can see some people in the room clearly still had problems with Cardassians, and I don't really understand why. Where it's very, very extremely 1,000% clear that the only one who had problems with the Cardassians was you, O'Brien. But you're talking like, oh, I don't have problems. I don't understand why anyone else could. That's just a level of being obtuse that's like ridiculous. But also have to talk about how inconsistent and this is the first episode the Cardassians were portrayed in, so I understand like they changed their mind, but the Cardassians fired on the Enterprise with their shields down and didn't do any damage, and so they were portrayed as being totally inferior to the Federation. And honestly, I think this is a bad idea. They did the same thing with the Terralians or whoever, I don't care about. And I understand why they retconned this later in Deep Space Nine to make them a bit more on par, so they're a bigger threat. And not just, of course, the last 2 seasons of Next Generation as well, because they aired at the same time as Deep Space Nine. So it makes sense. But it is a total retcon. I've heard some people try to make in-universe excuses to, oh, well, maybe it was a minor ship that went up against the Enterprise. I'm like, stop it. Stop it! Please do not try to come up with in-universe excuses to something that's very clearly just a writer's retcon that they changed their mind. It frustrates me. It pisses me off. It upsets me so much. Some people actually go out of their way and love to try to come up with it. I hate these in-universe excuses for what really is just simply just the writers changing their mind. There's no fucking excuse. They made it very clear that this was the top-of-the-line Cardassian warship. They made it very clear this was the best technology that they had. And, oh, maybe they just suddenly got this huge technological boom within 2 years. No, they didn't. Stop it. Just stop it. For the love of God. It's just a writer's retcon, and accept it as that. Now, I absolutely I think Bob Gunton in this episode is also amazing. He played the warden in Shawshank Redemption. I actually saw this episode before I saw Shawshank Redemption, so when I saw Shawshank Redemption, I was like, hey, it's Captain Maxwell. But that he does a really great job in just a few scenes he's in, particularly that one where he's talking to Picard and he's trying to justify what he does. And Picard's just so awesome in this scene. It's like, when he was like, lives were at stake. He's like, whose lives? We had to act now. Why? Like the way Picard just sits there, stone-faced, and just like, that was such a great scene. But what was even great was when O'Brien beamed over to talk Maxwell out of destroying the Cardassian ship, and the whole conversation was just so gold. And it ends with that song, the Minstrel Boy song, which I gotta admit I had stuck in my head like a week after watching this episode again. I kept humming and singing that song because that scene was just so powerful. It's just so nuanced that the undertones and the underscores with when Maxwell and O'Brien were just sitting there singing that song. And after singing the song, Maxwell realized, he's like, I'm not going to win this one in my chief. And it's what got him to back down. It was just such a powerful scene. So this is a really great episode. So anyway, let me get into the next episode, which is Devil's Due. Now this is what, again, I mentioned at the top of the video, this is one of the episodes that reminds me a lot of Season 4. And it's one of the ones I've seen the most as well, because I remember when I was watching Next Gen on sitcom, or not sitcoms, on, repeat, syndication, that's the word I'm looking for. On syndication, when they're showing the repeats, it was before I saw Season 3, and I heard about, like, Yesterday's Enterprise. I heard about this episode where Worf gets disincarnated from the Klingons. I heard about an episode where Data has a daughter, and an episode where another Q appears. Like, I kept wanting to see those episodes, but instead they kept showing this episode over and over again. In fact, I have a very clear memory of tuning in one day for Next Generation because I was really hoping it would be an episode I hadn't seen before. And they show this, and it opens up with Data doing the Scrooge thing. And I'm like, oh my god, not this episode again. I've already seen it a billion times. But as for the episode itself, watching again, it's actually a decent episode. I mean, there's a lot of logical flaws in it, but it's an interesting concept of a con artist pretending to be a devil in order to take over the whole planet. I do think that she is being a bit obtuse, like she's not a very good con artist because she does too much. Like, she has an entire planet, she should be happy with that. But no, she tries to take over the Enterprise as well, which she should have realized she would never be able to accomplish. So that's where I sort of lose my suspension of disbelief, because her reach overextends her grasp. And plus, actually, she could even almost have the Enterprise, but she allows Picard to do this trial just so she could have Picard too. I mean, okay, Picard is hot, sure, but I mean, he's not so hot that she'd be willing to risk going to jail, where at the moment she's a leader of the entire planet. Come on, no one's that hot. I'm sorry. So I really don't buy that either, but some of those trial scenes are amazing, particularly with the best one is when Picard like shows her up by stealing her technology, and he like does the tremors and totally shows her up when everyone at this point everyone thought she was all powerful, and he's like, I'm gonna steal her magic, and she's like, oh, the impudence, and he turns into impudence is pretending to be Feklar. Like, that was just such an amazing scene. And I absolutely cannot talk about this episode without mentioning that part where Picard is in doing his cross-examination of the Prime Minister or whatever, and he's like, did she even pick up a single piece of trash? And then there was a meme made of that moment where he says trash, and he has this look on his face, and the meme of course turns this into this, where Picard, so the meme is like Picard going Arr! From this episode, which I'm sorry, I really love that meme, I'm sorry, and I always think about that, but anyway, I had to bring that up. So I mean, this episode's okay. It's one of those okay episodes from Season 4. Anyway, we'll get into the next episode, which is another great episode, Clues, which was also another one of my favorite episodes growing up. It is still one of my favorite episodes now. It's probably not, it's more of top 20 material though, rather than top 5 material like it used to be when I was a teenager before Season 6 and 7 aired. But I still think this is one of the best like mystery episodes they've ever done. Just the way that they slowly assemble the information, and it does generally make you wonder why the hell is Data acting so weird and refusing to tell them that when they discover one clue leads to another clue leads to another clue, and they're starting to really clearly get the picture that they were out for more than 30 seconds, and Data is still stubbornly refusing. And what I love about this so much, even to this day, is that once it is revealed what really happened, like it makes even more sense. Those are the best mysteries. There's a lot of other mysteries which, I talked about before, where once you get the big reveal, you go back and watch the episode and it actually doesn't add up. It actually seems contrived. It's like, this character really wouldn't act this way. They were just doing it because the writers are trying to withhold this information from the audience. But you watch this episode, Data's behavior completely adds up, even once you know what the mystery is. In fact, it makes even more sense because the way Data is speaking, he speaks very carefully. Like, this is very masterfully written dialogue, because he speaks very carefully to try to hide the fact of what really happened, because he knows it will result in the Enterprise's destruction if they find out. But the way he states it makes it clear, like the undercurrent of what he's saying in his own Data way. That's why it's brilliant dialogue. Is, please stop investigating this. I'm doing this for your benefit. I'm looking out for you. Just trust me and stop looking into this. And of course, Data wouldn't say it like that because that's not in Data's character, but he does say it like that in his own Data way. And I love that. And then I always remember seeing that scene that completely fucking blew my mind, where you still don't know what happened. It's still a mystery, but things are starting to come to a head, and the Enterprise start heading back. And all of a sudden, you get Counselor Troi. You walk into Data's quarters and go, "The plan has failed," where it's clearly like an alien that's controlling her body. And I remember seeing that, and I was like, what? I was completely blew my mind. And then when they revealed what it actually was, there was this isolationist species that didn't even want anyone else to know their existence, where they were so xenophobic and paranoid, and that they were willing to destroy the Enterprise over that. Like, that was just a powerful episode. Anyway, let me get into the next episode, which is First Contact, which is another one of those mediocre episodes I was never on board with. I think it's okay, but it's kind of like, oh, here's an alien race that's just like the humans are in 20th century. It's obvious that this is their surrogate of, instead of doing an episode about aliens coming to Earth, it's like, oh, well, let's do it from the other perspective. Let's have the humans be the one to come to a 20th century setting. And you know what? A lot of people praise this episode for the format of showing it from the other aliens' perspective. I actually didn't like that. I'm going to be honest. I find this format, particularly in this episode, to just be very distancing. It's very disconnecting, because I never really get in the mindset of these other aliens, because I don't know who they are. They're just guest stars. When I see Riker, I'm like, oh, that's Riker. But then when I see, they try to show Riker from their perspective as this alien invader, but I know better, because I know who Riker is. And when Picard introduced him, I'm like, oh, that's Picard. So I think I don't like the format. I think all it does is it distances me from the episode, that I would have gotten into this episode more if they actually did it from the Enterprise crew's perspective. But, that's just me. But overall, I mean, I do like how they have that conservative guy who's clearly a conservative guy who is like, oh, and I think the commentary is kind of true to modern times, even now, 30 years after this episode aired. But I don't know. I still don't think it's the most interesting. It's just, it's fine. Anyway, another episode that's just fine, Galaxy's Child. I did like how they brought Leah Brahms back. I think this justified Booby Trap's existence, because that episode stood on its own. I don't get why they had a Leah Brahms holodeck that Geordi was mooching on the whole time. But that being said, the interactions between LaForge and Brahms in this episode doesn't work. I'll just put it that way. First of all, I really don't like LaForge's behavior here, and a lot of people have pointed out that he's being kind of a creep in this episode, which he is. And honestly, I wish they would have played him different, because he comes off saying, "Oh, I'm not expecting anything romantic between me and Leah, but whatever the situation, I think we're going to be good friends." I like that line, and I wish they would have played the character to be true to that line. But as they played him in this episode, that's clearly not the case, and he's clearly full of shit when he says that, which I wish he wasn't. I mean, I wish he really did try to just be her friend and not. But he's like, they have him like ask her to his quarters for dinner, and he plays this Latin music, puts on candlelight, and he's obviously hitting on her very, very fucking hard, to the point she finally is like, "Look, I'm married, leave me alone." And he's like, "Whoa." Like, I wish they didn't do that. That makes him really cheesy. And plus, not even getting into his whole reaction after she finds out that he was like making out with a holographic version of herself. She had every right to be outraged by that. And so, in the way he handles, like, "Oh, you're being mean to me the whole time, so that justifies everything." He kind of deflects in that scene to be like, "Oh, I'm just trying to be your friend, and you're treating me like shit." No, you made out with a holographic version of her, and then you hit on her hard. That had more to do with it than just her being mean to him. But, if we're going to argue the flip side of this, the way she was treating him was really obtuse, and I didn't buy it, because Picard, even forgetting all that booby trap stuff, Picard's like, "Oh, this is an engineer coming aboard who's an admirer of your work, and she's coming to evaluate you and learn about what you did." And LaForge is like, "Great." And she shows up, he's like, "What'd you do to my ship? How are you fucking everything up?" And she was nitpicking everything he did. Like, that's... why would Picard introduce her like that if she's just going to come in and like nitpick and be totally rude to him? So even that side, both of these characters were just written very poorly. And the more I'm talking about it, the more I think I should give this episode a 5 instead of a 6. So I'm going to change this 6 into a 5. There we go. But anyway, the side plot with the aliens in space was kind of interesting. It was this again A plot B plot thing, and I do like how they actually tie those two plots together at the end. I do like how LaForge and Brahms end up working together to overcome the situation, and they sour the milk and all that. Like, that's memorable. That's good stuff. I just wish they would have handled the characters' interactions between these two characters better earlier in the episode. So, as I said, average episode overall. Next episode is Eyes in the Dark, One Moon, Circles, Night Terrors, which I love the music in this episode. You got it. Some of the music is very memorable. The creepy, it does that creepy atmosphere music very well. Here's the problem. And this is something my mother, who's a nurse, pointed out to me when I first saw this episode. There are people in real life who don't go through REM sleep. I think even my mother, I think, said that she was one of them. For a period of her life, she was not having REM sleep. And it doesn't drive you crazy. It doesn't make you see dead bodies come to life, make you hallucinate and shit like that. This episode is scientifically inaccurate. So that's one thing. Another thing is, does kind of drag. I do think it's like a collection of really good scenes, but if you put it together, it's kind of boring and it's not all that interesting. It's another cliche. Ooh, there's a virus causing mayhem on the people, and the Enterprise trapped in this, non-believable thingy majogger that they can't get off. So it was kind of tropey, tired, boring episode with some great moments. Like, I do like some of the creepy scenes, like the bodies coming to life in the morgue, and then they have that cheesy stuff with the guys in the bar, like trying to start a bar fight, and the guy has to get out her phaser and shoot it. Like, that was stupid. I'm sorry, that was really dumb. But I did like the final resolution of Troi working with Data to figure out Yeah, this is actually really similar to The Lost, which they just did this fucking plot where they're trapped somewhere or whatever. But anyway, Troi works with Data to figure out the eyes in the dark, what it means, and it's another alien trying to communicate with them. And it's kind of dumb, though, because Troi has to go in to tell the aliens that they're ready to do the thing, but she's just saying, I have to find you to tell you. Just say now, Troi. Jesus Christ. But anyway, so this is another episode that's ultimately just okay. It's one of those mediocre episodes that I mentioned before that really reminds me of Season 4. Next, we'll get into Identity Crisis, which is another episode I said was one of those mediocre episodes that reminds me a lot of Season 4. But I think this one's a bit worse than mediocre. It's not just okay like Night Terror's worse. I actually actively don't like this episode. First of all, they introduce this character that Geordi knew from a previous ship, and they just throw her in right away. I think the way they handled this character's introduction was very terrible. I felt very disconnected from this character and her relationship with Geordi. It's just like all of a sudden, like, oh, the Geordi and Lighten team, we're the best buddies ever. Like, no. You can't, that's not how that works. You have to earn the relationship to us, the audience. We don't know who this character is. We don't know her relationship with LaForge. You can say they have a pre-existing relationship, fine, but you still have to establish it for us, the audience, which this episode did not at all. So I was completely disconnected, and I did not give two craps about this character who was basically the main character of the episode, and the whole episode was focused on her, and I gave two shits about her. And plus, I mean, it's somewhat of an interesting concept of having like this alien virus that turns humans or other alien species into them, and they're like invisible and they hide and whatnot. But that also was the way it was executed was very uninteresting and boring. And when LaForge was doing his like holodeck investigation, he was looking at the shadow. It was kind of like, let's move on with this. So, I'm sorry, this is actually not a very good episode at all. So, let me get into another average, mediocre, blah episode of Season 4, and that's The Nth Degree. Yeah, this episode's boring too. I mean, I kind of like this. It's not a totally bad episode, don't get me wrong, because I do like some of the character stuff they do with Barkley, how he was all nervous, and they show that he's made progress even at the start of the episode where he's acting in the play. Sure, he's terrible, doing a terrible job of acting, but he's still like making progress and becoming part of the crew, but then he instantly starts to become a genius. But then the episode, I mean, that's somewhat interesting how he starts hitting on Troi and doing a good job. Is ho 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 ho, but it just happens too fast, and I'm just not very interested in it. And that storyline seems pretty much one beat. And at the end, the big reveal is that, and plus, once Barkley takes over the computer of the Enterprise, that's when the episode gets really boring to me, I gotta be honest. And the big reveal that, oh, it's just some alien species who are also explorers, but they're like the lazy version of explorers. They're like, I can't be bothered going out to explore the galaxy. Let's just force everyone else to come to me. I'm just too lazy to go anywhere. That was kind of, really, that's what your big reveal is? That's really stupid, I'm sorry. It is. And plus, like, most people, like, the Starfleet, they're lucky Starfleet was, like, they're more open-minded, they're more friendly, and they're more willing to avoid conflict of all kind. So when they show up, they're still irritated. Like, Picard's still pissed off that they were brought there against their will, but they're still willing to, like, all right, we'll exchange it. Most alien species wouldn't be. Most alien species would be pissed off. You lazy motherfuckers brought me all the way out here just to meet me instead of getting off your fucking ass and doing it yourself. Jesus Christ. So this episode was, again, not very good. Okay, so then we'll get into the next episode, which is Cupid. It's a very, very silly Q episode. It's probably the silliest Q episode. We're at the Robin Hood episode, which is... I'm sorry, it's a bit too ridiculous for me. There are some funny moments in here, like such as Worf saying, "Sir, I protest. I am not a merry man." Like, that is really funny, but it is a bit stupid that he would even say that. I mean, come on. And I actually was really irritated when I learned, because I always loved the scene where Worf took that, instrument, whatever you call it, that LaForge was playing. He just grabs it from him, smashes it, and hands it back and says, sorry. Like, I always loved that, but when I found out they just ripped that off from Animal House, because if you watched this John Belushi film in the 70s called I think it's called Animal House, if I remember correctly, because I had never seen that, and I still haven't seen that movie to this day, but I saw a scene where he does the exact same thing, where there's some at a party and some hippies are playing guitar. He just snatches the guitar, smashes it, and hands it back and says sorry. So they just stole that joke from that movie, just outright, and that kind of annoys me. But anyway, I do like the interactions between Picard and Vosh in this episode. The concept of Q wanting to apologize to, or wanting to, not apologize, but wanting to make good. It's like he owes him a favor. So his idea of paying a favor back is putting all their lives in danger and snatching them away to some fictional Sherwood Forest out of nowhere. Like, I'm sorry, that's just too far-fetched. The writers were definitely smoking something when they wrote this episode. But I do like the first part of it with the interactions between Picard and Vosh, and Picard being all private and not wanting his friends to know about Vosh and stuff. Like, that was cool, but as soon as I got into the Robin Hood stuff, I was like, oh my god, it's just a bit ridiculous. But ultimately, this is another, I would say, fine episode. It's good, it's fine, whatever. So let me get into the next episode, which is another great one, The Drumhead. Now, this is an episode I never really appreciated when I was a teenager. It wasn't until I got older, especially in the early 2000s, when this episode was actually even more relevant in the early 2000s than it was when it first came out in the 90s, because it really spoke to the aftermath of 9/11. Now, obviously, that hadn't happened when this episode was first written, first came out. Obviously, this was more of a metaphor for McCarthyism, but of course, McCarthyism kind of made a comeback in the 2000s with everyone doing their sort of witch hunting. Not only, I would say, the Arab community, which did get hit really hard, not just Arab, like any Middle Easterner, like really was discriminated against a lot in the 2000s, but also anyone who was anti-war, who was against the Iraq War, was also like the communist witch hunts and whatnot, and treated like, oh, you hate America, blah, blah, blah. That sort of thing was going on. So this episode became even, I think that era was when I really started to appreciate this episode, and how, because a lot of times episodes like this can seem like they're prophesizing, they're predicting the future, but it's really speaking of the past. So it just really speaks to how history often repeats itself, and we often have the same issues over and over again. But anyway, this episode in particular, like when I first saw it, I didn't like the character of Admiral Satiq. She is a get off my screen character. Like, she's so annoying to watch, and I can't stand her. And so when I first saw this episode, that's what was to the forefront of my mind, which is maybe why I didn't like this episode that much, because I just wanted her to go away. But once I appreciate what this episode was saying, what it was doing, even though she is still kind of a get off my screen character, I don't mind that as much, because they use this get off my screen character very well, because it does illustrate just how people like that in real life could have good intentions but do the worst things, and how they were trying to take away people's civil liberties and just ignoring their rights, like they did with the guy who had Romulan ancestry, whenever, and how she was making this a bigger deal than it actually was. And of course, you also got some amazing Picard's, some of the best, most iconic Picard speech in this episode when he's put on trial, and he speaks to, and I love how he quotes her father, and she just pisses her off and makes her go mad, and that guy gets, the Admiral Henry just gets up and leaves. Like, it's such an iconic moment. And again, this is another example of a great episode that's just mostly just dialogue. This is a bottle show. Like, it had a few guest stars, but other than that, it all took place on the Enterprise in just a few rooms with just dialogue scenes. And they have, and again, I always talk about this, how that impresses me more when an episode of show or movie can make suspense, make you intrigued, have you go through emotional ups and downs by just dialogue and not having to resort to fancy camera moves or action or special effects or anything like that. Just people in the room talking. To me, that's always more impressive. And I think this episode is extremely impressive. Plus, the social commentary is probably... I do love Star Trek's leftist social commentary, which it often does. And I think this is probably Star Trek social commentary at its best. One of the best examples of something, as I said, that's even more relevant years after it came out. Very powerful stuff. Anyway, let me get to the next episode, which is Half-Life. And I'm sorry, I keep bringing this up. One person in particular I keep picking on, so I won't pick on you this time. But I've heard a lot of people say that they like Loxana and Troi better in Deep Space Nine than Next Generation. But I'm sorry, particularly with watching this episode, I'm just like, you could not, I'm sorry. You are objectively wrong. Counselor Troi, I mean not Counselor, Loxana and Troi appearances on Deep Space Nine was Forsaken, which had one good scene in the elevator, but other than that was a terrible episode where she's hitting on Odo. And then fucking Fascination, which was overall a terrible episode where, she's making everyone horny. Well, she's just horny for Odo. And then The Muse, which was a stupid sitcom which didn't freaking add up, where she had a baby with some guy who's trying to steal the baby away, so she's running to Odo for help. Those are all terrible, terrible, terrible episodes where Loxana and Troi was terrible, terrible in them. And you compare that to her Next Generation appearances, excluding Manhunt, which was just as bad as those 3 episodes. You got episodes like this and Dark Page, which are like a billion times better. I'm sorry, they were a billion times better than how Loxana and Troi appeared in Deep Space Nine. I'm sorry. It's like, there's other YouTube channels that are kind of insistent that, and other Star Trek reviewers that are insistent that Loxana's appearances of Deep Space Nine were better than her ones in Next Generation. I'm sorry, you are objectively wrong. I'm sorry, you are. It's not very often I say that. But clearly, episodes like this and Dark Page are like a billion times better than her Deep Space. Her Deep Space Nine appearances were clearly the worst, along with Manhunt. But anyway, sorry. I'm sorry, but that's what I kept thinking about while watching this episode, because this is a good episode. Loxana and Troi is actually not annoying at all in this episode. This is actually a good use of Loxana and Troi because it's a fascinating concept. In fact, this is one of the few times where Loxana and Troi is hitting on this guy and actually gets the guy and they actually form a relationship and you actually think you like them as a couple and think they make a great couple. What a good concept. Why don't you actually have Loxana and Troi be with a partner who works for her rather than having her constantly hit on people who clearly don't feel that way about her? I like enough of that stupid joke, and that's why the Deep Space Nine appearances don't work, because she's constantly hitting on Odo, who clearly doesn't feel that way about her, and there's just enough of that shit. It actually works so much better. You put her with a man who actually does love her and actually is a good fit for her, but then you add this tragic romance element on top of that, where it has this cultural thing that she doesn't understand, where people at the age of 60 have to kill themselves. And I actually thought that was kind of powerful, that she convinces him not to go through with it, but then he is exiled from the planet, and even his own daughter says, please come back and kill yourself. And it's, I don't know, you could kind of loosely get this concept and think maybe a culture could have this, but this is, I do think this particular ritual within this culture is wrong. I agree with, I side with Loxana on this one. That's clearly just stupid, and that these aliens are being in the wrong by basically this guy who could save their entire planet They're saying, no, fuck you, I don't care. It doesn't matter if you can save the planet, you gotta kill yourself. Honestly, I think these alien dudes deserve to die. I'm sorry, call me cynical or whatever, but if their sun blows up, it's their own damn fault for making the one guy who could save him kill himself just because they want to keep up their stupid rituals. I think they get what they deserve in that case. But I think it was a powerful ending when Roxana, even though she desperately didn't want him to go through with it, she was willing, once he made the decision to go back and do it, she decided to go with him. She's like, I'm not going to put up a fuss. I just want to be there for you. Like, that was very touching. I almost wish they could have shown us the moment where he did, but then maybe it's better they ended here, and plus it saves them a lot of money, which is the main reason why they didn't do it, to not show it. So I think this is a really good episode. I don't think it's the best episode ever. As I said, it's still, a lot of it was just Loxana and being silly, whatever. But I don't know. This might be the best Loxana and Troi episode. It's either this or Dark Page. So I'll let you know when I get to Dark Page which one I like better. Anyway, let me get to the next episode, which is The Host. Which is, alright, let's get it out of the way real quick. The Trill are nothing like this in Deep Space Nine. They completely retconned the Trill. They're absolutely changed their character entirely. They shouldn't even be called the Trill in Deep Space Nine. They should be called something else. Shove that out of the way. Alright, now let's talk about this episode. It's not a good episode. It's really cheesy with the romance between Crusher and Odan. I completely do not buy. It's obvious they just shove it in there because they want to set up this situation where the Odan's now in Riker, and now Crusher has to have this romance with Riker, and it's weird for her to get it that way. So it was really contrived, and I really didn't buy it, and I really didn't care about any of this. I mean, some of the character interactions I got a bit were well done. Particularly like with the, Crusher feeling that heartache after, finding out about Odan, and that Odan's in Riker, and how she just couldn't deal with that situation. There was something very human about it. But the issue, as I said, was how they got there was really contrived, so that did interfere with my enjoyment of this episode. And a lot of people say that this is a commentary on homosexuality or discrimination against homosexuals, and then as I did a couple of videos about that, and I think this is not a good example, and I don't think people should even bring it up. It's not actually relevant. Now, some people, there's just one scene at the end of the episode when Odan goes into a woman and Crusher kind of rejects her, and they're like, oh, Crusher's being discriminating against homosexuals. No, she's not. Crusher is not a lesbian. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think people, just like you said, everyone has the right to be gay. Everyone has the right to be straight as well. It's not like Crusher's saying, ooh, you want to be in love with other girls? That's disgusting. That's against my morals. You're morally wrong. She doesn't say any of that. She says, it is not for me. And there's nothing wrong where they're saying that, okay, you're in a woman's body now. And by the way, it's not even just a woman's body. It's the fact she can't get over the nature of the Trill, of how they're little symbiont things that go from body to body. Like even when, Odan was in Riker's body, who was a man, she still wasn't okay with it. So it even has more to do with that. It's not just, oh, you're in another woman's body. It's you're in another body, period. Now, it does make it kind of clear at the end of the episode, because that she assumes it's going to be a man that Odan's going into, and it is clear that she's thrown off a bit because she does make out with Riker, even though Riker is someone that she knows and thinks of as a brother. But when Odan's put into a woman, she's like, whoa, nah. You get the feeling even when Odan in the woman's body kisses Crusher's hand, that she's kind of like, oh, icky. But again, not to that degree. And again, I think if Crusher wants to be straight, she has every right to be straight. She's not discouraging and saying, oh, you can't be in same-sex couples. She never says that. She's just like, I'm straight and that's fine. Everyone has a right to be gay. Everyone has a right to be straight. Whatever, that's just her particular preference. So I don't think that's discrimination at all, but that is just me. And plus, as I said, I don't think this is an episode that makes a commentary on that it wasn't intended to. I don't think it does. So I don't think it's a good example to bring up anyway. But regardless of all that, they don't do a good job establishing the romance between Odon and Crusher, so that kind of tanks the whole episode. Anyway, let me get into the next episode, which is The Mind's Eye. Now, I always loved this episode. I always thought it was a great episode, but watching it now, I really do love this episode a lot more. I come to appreciate this as probably one of the best episodes of Next Generation. First of all, it's one of the darkest episodes of Next Generation. I always talk about season 6 and 7, how they went kind of really dark once Michael Piller left. But here's an episode that kind of snuck in before that, that's actually probably even darker. That's about LaForge being brainwashed. I mean, you could have that concept and not go that dark. But they went there. Like, the camera angles, the music, like, just the way they portrayed this episode was really dark. It was really fucked up. Particularly, like, when LaForge is first in the shuttle just playing games on his way to Risa, and suddenly he's a Romulan warlord, just appears, decloaks, and kidnaps him. Like, they portray that as just as frightening and horrifying as they possibly could, which is the right way to go, I believe. And then, like, the scenes when they're brainwashing him and they have him kill, like, holographic O'Brien, like, that's just, especially the way, like, he kills O'Brien and then he's like, hey, do you guys mind if I join you? And they're like, sure. So he just tosses O'Brien's dead body aside and just sits down and starts, you know, that's some dark shit. And I think this episode does it very well. But on top of that, the situation they portrayed with, like, a Klingon outpost where there's, like, rebels and they accuse the Federation of interfering with this. That's really interesting stuff. And plus, I actually really love the way the Romulans are portrayed in this episode, because this is probably the better use of the Romulans is when they're more of doing this sort of covert, trying meddling interference rather than straight out attacking. Like in 10 Man, they were kind of mustache twirly villains were like, we're going to blow up your ship. No, this is probably the better use of Romulans, when they do covert shit, like fucking brainwash people to try to start a war between the Federation and the Klingons. I mean, that is some really dark shit, and it's more obvious than ever that they're portraying them as Cold War Soviet Union, but sort of the more darker version of that. And I love that. And plus, you get that scene that I love the quote so much, where Picard is talking to the Klingon governor, and the Klingon governor says, oh, you just want to just help the rebels because we're on the border of the Federation, this is strategically important, and this could be used as a place to attack the Federation. And Picard says what I was thinking. It's like, wait a second, you're speaking as if we're enemies and not allies. But then the Klingon governor says, and you speak the lies of a Tark. Which, I'm sorry, I love that line. I love the cadence. And it says, you speak the lies of the Torque. It's just the way he says it is something that I love the quote. Even more the Klingon language stuff. That's one of my favorite Klingon language quotes. But then, like, Picard, swears at him in Klingon, and then the other Klingon dude comes in and is like, gentlemen, and governor guy is like, oh, you swear well, Picard. You must have Klingon blood in your veins. That line always struck me as kind of fake, because does anyone actually say, oh, you swear well? Like, if I learned to swear in Russian, I met with someone in Russian and swore at them in Russian, would they say, oh, you swear well, you must have Russian blood in your veins? They wouldn't say that. That just seems a bit fake to me. But anyway, the way I love the fact that the Klingon ambassador, who appears to be on Picard's side, is revealed to be the Romulan agent. Like, that again was a brilliant moment. And plus, again, this is another case like Clues where you go back and it makes sense. It totally fits that this dude was working with the Romulans the whole time. So it all works. But one of my favorite parts of the episode is the ending scene where Data is figuring this out and putting this all together. Like, I don't think they did this a lot with Picard where he figures out. I love that they had Data be the one who figured this out, and I think it's a great Data moment. The way he slowly starts to piece, and the way this scene is intercut with the really well cinematic shots of LaForge getting ready to kill the Klingon governor dude, and the music involved. Do you see? It's beautiful. It is masterclass editing, filmmaking. It's just such a great scene. It does it so well to build it in. This is what I mean, because the script on its own, this could have been a bad episode. Even if you keep the script exactly the same. But the way it was shot, the way it was acted, the way the music was put in, the way it was edited, really elevates this to masterclass filmmaking, to really great suspense building. There's other lesser director, this could have been not suspenseful at all, but because it was done so well, you were absolutely on the edge of your seat, wondering, holy shit, is Data going to figure this out before LaForge can kill the governor? Which clearly the answer is yes, but it still has that. You forget that though, because the element of suspense is done so well. And especially when Data is goes to Worf, it's take Mr. LaForge into custody, and Worf at first is what are you saying? And then Data says, that is an order. I think that's the first time, or the only time I've seen, well, maybe Gambit later on, but this is the only time where I've ever seen Data actually give an order to say to someone, because he is technically the superior officer to Worf, just say, that is an order. That was such an amazing moment. Although I don't kind of like how Picard is the one who snatches the favor, because they always have to make Picard the hero, and they could have just done Worf as the hero, but those other Klingon guys were trying to fight him, and he had to call out for LaForge, whatever. But then it was an amazing moment where Data comes in, he explains everything, lays it out, their plan, and the ambassador guy tries to be I won't be searched by you, and the governor is just oh, I agree, I think we should take him back to our ship and then search him ourselves. And then the ambassador guy kind of just cowers, actually, I request asylum. Picard's yeah, right, asylum, whatever. That was an amazing ending. And then the final scene, which was again very dark, very tragic. It really gets into the tragedy of how such being abducted and brainwashed would really damage someone, the way LaForge is but I remember everything, which is another classic line. The only fault of this episode, which I think I'm going to give it more of a pass on, I think it bothered me more in the past than it does now, but the main fault, the obvious fault of this episode, is that this should have permanent, lasting effects for LaForge, and it's completely forgotten about after this episode and never mentioned again. At the end of the episode, Troy's this is going to take a long time, but we will work through this. Credits roll, completely erased. But, that's a problem that's kind of commonplace with Next Generation in particular. But I will say, not always. The Kalar thing, the Alexander thing, for example, and even the Borg thing with family, and the Inner Light. They touch on that later on in lessons. So Next Generation can follow up on stuff like this, but it's probably more common that they don't. But I think this should have been an example where they followed up on and made it a lasting story effect, but whatever. I don't think I'm going to hold it against this episode, because I love this episode. I think this episode's amazing. Alright, so now we get into the next episode, which is In Theory, which I think this is a good episode. In theory. Get it? In theory, this is a good episode. In practice, not so much. Because I like the concept that of Data having a girlfriend. I think that's a great concept, and there's parts of the way that plays out that I really like. But I actually see this more as a missed opportunity of something that they should have done. And again, I'm getting back to the episodic nature of Next Gen, which again, it's not always episodic. There are examples of recurring storylines, recurring themes, recurring things with lasting, like working disaccommodated, all this stuff has consequences going forward. Like even yesterday's Enterprise, which by nature was a reset, still ends up having consequences, although I think that's cheesy, but I'll get to that in the next episode. Data having a girlfriend should have been a long-term story arc. It shouldn't have been a one-off episode. They should have gave him a recurring girlfriend. Now, if it was a Starfleet officer on board the Enterprise, then they should have made that a regular thing. Like, she wouldn't have to appear in every episode, but they could have, Data, you're going out on this date and have an ongoing relationship. Maybe somewhere down the line they could kill off the character so that they don't get married or anything. Or don't kill her off and have them get married eventually. Do that. Like, I would love... In fact, this is one of the biggest regrets I have in Next Generation as a whole, is the fact that they never gave Data a long-term girlfriend or a wife. I think he should have gotten married. And I really regret the fact that, and spoilers for Picard if you haven't seen the latest season 1 of Picard, is they officially declared Data dead. I mean, you could say he died in Nemesis, but there was always the hope that he could be brought back. But here they made it very clear, no, we're erasing his program from good, so he's done, he's kaput. And that's the biggest... I really didn't like they did that. I wish that they kept him around. As Brent Spiner said, he wanted the character gone. But it's because the one thing they haven't done with Data yet is giving him a lasting, long-term love. Because that's a very interesting concept. That's something I think they really should have done. So I like the aspects of seeing Data with a girlfriend in this episode. But... I think it is really extremely hurt by the fact that they just end the relationship at the end of the episode, and it turns out just to be a mistake. And although I do think the scene where Data is acting like overly cheesy, it's like, can I get you a drink, dear? Like, that's funny. But again, I think that's out of character for Data. Like, I kind of get the point that he doesn't know how to behave as a lover, and so I think there's ways that could have worked, because that could have worked if she just been like, Data, that's not you, be yourself. Like, and then he researched it more and found out in a real long-term relationship people don't act like that. That's more of like infatuation, just picking up people for a date kind of thing, where you're like, oh, can I get you a drink? Although people don't act like that in real life. But and so I buy that he would get confused, but then he would learn that all he does is to really be himself, and that he could be in a long-term relationship if he was just himself, because we saw that earlier in the episode where the two of them actually did have really good chemistry because Data was just being himself. And so they could have kept that scene if they corrected it, and Data was just like, it was a learning experience for him where he realized that he didn't have to put on this air of being love. And plus, like, the fact, one of the things that the reason why she broke up with him is because when they kissed, she was like, what are you thinking of? And he said all this other bullshit and just mentioned the pressure of your lips. But I didn't like that, because I do think Data, and maybe I'm anthropomorphizing Data a bit more, but I'm basing this off of his portrayal in previous episodes, is that he would be thinking, he would know the proper response is to say that, even though he couldn't say I love you because that's an emotion, or I still think he could say care about you without having emotion. He could say and because they did this right earlier in the episode where he said, I wrote this whole program about you because that's how invested I am. I think they could have had him upplay that and the relationship could have worked. I'm just really pissed off that they just made this relationship fail. And I can tell this was an executive decision, producer. We can't have a long-term relationship between Data and the girl. And I think that was wrong. That was bullshit. But anyway, there's also a throwaway storyline B-plot in this episode, Anomaly Thingy-Majogger, where the interphasic spacing, where they just kill off. Well, it's not a red shirt, it's a yellow shirt, but essentially a red shirt because they're wearing yellow shirts in Next Gen. And they just kill her off and nobody gives a shit. And then kind of like what I was talking about in Booby Trap, how they always have to make Picard the hero, where Riker's like, okay, because I have to have a shuttlecraft go out and guide the Enterprise. And Riker's like, okay, I'll lead the shuttle. And Picard's like, no, not this time, I'm going to do it. And Riker rightfully is like, no, well, you're indispensable. You're irreplaceable. I need to do it. And Picard's like, I think this is our best chance of getting out if I pilot the ship. I'm sorry, Picard, but that is a dick move. And not only is that a dick move, but that's wrong. What he's basically saying to Riker is like, I think you're a shit pilot, and I think I'm way better than you. I think if you go out there, the Enterprise will be destroyed. I'm the only one on this ship who can fucking do it because I'm badass. Like, I love Picard. He is the best at a lot of things, negotiations, speeches, everything, but not piloting. I'm sorry, he's not the best of everything. He's not fucking Superman. There's other instances where he has to realize in certain situations other people are going to be better at you. And piloting is most definitely an example. And plus, it's established later on in Chain of Command that Riker is the best pilot on the ship. So this, again, that really pisses me off. And Star Trek always has to make... You don't always have to make Picard the hero, for fuck's sake. It's just annoying. He can be the hero in most episodes, but give some episodes up, especially if it's just a stupid B-plot nobody gives a shit about. Come on. Anyway, so this is ultimately not a good episode. I mean, it's okay. It's not terrible, but whatever. Finally, let me get into the season finale, Season 4 Redemption, Part 1. As I said, this is an episode I liked a lot more when I was a teenager than I like it now. I think it's a decent episode. It's a good episode. It's very interesting. Of course, Worf gains his family name. He has to do the political maneuvering with Gowron and his brother. I think all that is very interesting stuff. And they introduce Lorsch and Bator, who are very interesting villains, and how they try to manipulate Picard, and they're really working with the Romulans. Like, all that is really interesting, good stuff. But it doesn't really, especially when I compare it to something like Reunion, it doesn't have the emotional impact. And that's why I think it makes sense that I liked this more when I was a kid, because I was more like, oh, this is a great action adventure type episode, which it is, but if you look beyond that, it's actually kind of hollow, and it doesn't have that great character story basis that other episodes like Reunion have. So, and I actually do think, as much as I talk about Best of Both Worlds and how I think it's overrated, I do really think that A Best of Both Worlds is better than Redemption. I think that's very clear. I'll agree with the masses on that, is that Redemption, as much as, it's a decent two-parter, but I don't think it's as good as Best of Both Worlds. I think it's kind of a bit too... Even though it's exciting and it's great seeing Worf get his family name back, and then Worf resigns, which I think is a tad bit contrived, but whatever, it's still exciting stuff. Well, what's more contrived is part 2, when they just, whatever, Worf, come back. Like, that happened way too easily. So it kind of undermines him resigning in the first place, but whatever. So it's a good episode. It's a good two-parter, but it's not the best. But of course, what really hurts this episode is the whole Tasha Yar daughter thing, which is a Romulan, half Romulan, who happens to look exactly like a Romulan version of Tasha Yar, which is just a contrived excuse to bring Denise Crosby back, who really wanted to go back because she realized how much better the show got after she quit. And you can't blame her for quitting, because the producers were assholes to her and everything was like in chaos in the first season. But the show got better after season 3, and she was like, if I just stuck it out, I could have been a part of this amazing show. And she wants to come back, so there was talks with her and producers behind the scenes, and that's actually how they brought her back for Yes Citizen and Breast in the first place, is that she kept trying to come back. So, let's just say that the Tasha Yar from the alternate universe had a daughter with a Romulan, and I'll play the daughter. Like, this was just a contrived excuse to bring her back, and it's really cheesy, soap opera-y, and stupid, but I guess I'll get more into that in part 2, but it made for a really bad cliffhanger. In retrospect to the Best of Both Worlds Part 1, which is the best cliffhanger of all time, this one was kind of like really cheesy. But anyway, still decent, a good episode, just not the best out there. Speaking of the best, now as I always do, let me get into the best and the worst episodes of Season 4. And let me start with the worst episodes of Season 4. We had some, the contenders for this were Remember Me, Final Mission, and Identity Crisis. All not very good episodes, but as for the worst episode of Season 4, very clearly was The Loss. Absolutely terrible episode that's painful to watch, incredibly annoying to watch. This is one of the episodes during my rewatch where I actively wanted to skip over it. I actively wanted to turn it off because it is very painful to watch this episode, to see just Troi treat everyone like shit and get away with it just because she lost her privilege. This is not a handicap. This is her losing privilege. Something that she had that everyone else didn't have. And now she's just like everyone else. She's like, whoa, fuck you. I don't want to be like everyone else. I'm better than you. That's basically what this episode is. So I have no sympathy for her. And I hate this episode with such a passion. Anyway. Let me get into the best episodes of Season 4. And for these, I am going to say honorable mentions were also Best of Both Worlds Part 2, Family, what else we got? The Wounded, definitely honorable mention. But to me, it came down to the top 3, which was really hard for me to choose between these 3 because I thought these 3 were all kind of on par for being amazing episodes. The Drumhead, something amazing Picard speeches, and The Mind's Eye, which I actually come to appreciate a lot more as a really dark and twisted episode that's just executed so well. But for the best episode of Season 4, I'm going to have to go with Reunion, another episode that I've learned to appreciate a lot more in recent years. And I just think everything about this episode is perfect. Like the Kalar, bringing her back, her interactions with Worf, bringing the way they integrated her into the Klingon story arc with Worf, and having the Doras and Gowron fighting over being the Chancellor, and it ending in that amazing hollering scene with amazing acting by Michael Dorn. Like, Michael Dorn kills it, where he's crying over Kalar's death and then goes to kill Doras, and then when he's dressed down by Picard afterward. This is one of the best episodes of the show. It's absolutely amazing. So anyway, my rating for Season 4 as a whole out of 10, I think I'm going to have to give this one an 8. Extremely good. Still a high rating. But, Season 3 I gave a 10. And this isn't as high as a 10. So I don't think it's as great. But this is one of the better seasons of Next Generation, that's for sure. It's way, way better than the first 2 seasons. I mean, clearly. It's still way highly improved. Even though it's kind of down from Season 3, it's still much, much better than the first 2. You have a lot of really memorable moments. And a lot, again, because there's examples this season of Star Trek, of the Next Generation embracing continuity with episodes like Reunion and The Mind's Eye, and freaking The Wounded and Drumhead. But then, of course, other examples where they kind of don't embrace continuity, such as The Mind's Eye, and in theory kind of hold it back a bit. But hey, The Mind's Eye is still an amazing episode. But this season does have bad episodes, unlike Season 3, unfortunately. And a lot of average episodes, but still a lot of great ones. So still overall, really good season. So anyway, that is it for my coverage of Season 4 of Star Trek Next Generation. And thank you guys so much for watching this. Be sure to leave your comments if you disagreed with any of my opinions, which I'm sure you did. I'd love to hear it. And be sure to check out my channel as I continue to cover Next Generation. Next month I will of course get into Season 5. And also I'm doing episode reviews of all Star Trek shows at the moment, so you can check out my channel for that. And for many other reviews on other shows like The Expanse and more. And also, if you really want to help support the channel, you can help support me on Patreon. Even $1 a month will get you access to a lot of features, including an early release of my Next Generation season reviews, which I release a couple weeks early for my Patreon supporters, and also lists of all the videos I'll be doing up. And I do a Patreon only series at the moment. I'm finishing up my coverage of Star Trek the animated series, and I have a lot of bonus features as well for those who want to donate more, and it's very helpful to my channel at the moment to keep my channel going. So if you do appreciate that, that would be very much appreciated, but understandable if you just can't do it at this time. But it's still great to leave your likes, support the channel, subscribe. All that sort of thing is also still very much appreciated. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you next time.